Welcome everybody to seminar number 17 of our series, What Were We Thinking? And today we're going to think a little further than thinking and think about thinking and acting. Although sometimes thinking is acting, I think, maybe. Well, maybe it's not, I'm not sure. But it's a fairly urgent question that emerged from one of our previous roundtable discussions. And that's a question that we really do need to ask ourselves is, well, what can what can you, what can anybody do to bring about social change, environmental change? So that's our question to some extent, I think. We want to be changing thinking, but is that enough? So I'm not going to go into any more detail about that. And instead, I'm going to invite Emma to introduce the subject and chat to us. Emma, as you probably all know, is a postdoctoral research fellow with the ISCIA chair. And her works is generally centered on ecological thinking, overlap between social identities, subjectivity, environmental ethics. And this, what shall we say, field of expertise follows from her doctorate, which was a kind of, as she says, in response to ecological destruction, is a kind of interdisciplinary attempt to address the complexity of social ecological agency. Ouch. And it's highly complex. I hope that a lot of the complexity has been feeding into our series. But I'm not going to say any more. Emma, thank you for being willing to guide us through this difficult question, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be having this discussion today because it's an emergent theme. This notion of agency in the Anthropocene, I called it, because I like alliteration and I like, drama, but really is an important theme. It emerged gradually from the very beginning. I mean, Andrea said we've had 17 already sessions of this seminar series that really poke at pertinent questions regarding different types of intersecting or overlapping crises: environmental, climate crisis, identity, social crises, and just most recently, the Gaza, well, not the Gaza, the Palestinian crisis, the devastation that's going on there. So in amongst all of this grappling with these really important and real issues, they touch our lives, they're affecting all of us on a daily issue. It's natural, I think, that what starts to emerge is a sense of, well, what can we do and what should we do? And this is really important because we're kind of we're dancing a dance here between a sort of a abstract philosophical and intellectualized level of thinking about thinking, and then sort of trying to bring it down or peg it to the territory of our earth by talking about, well, what can we actually do? And I find that in that question, there's a whole world of complexity, because you start to say, well, who are we talking about when we say there needs to be a change in thinking? One of the seminars was with Gary, and he posed the question, why won't we look up? In relation to, metaphorically speaking, about why won't we sort of face what's going on in terms of our environmental crisis and beyond, polycrisis, you could say. And, again, what we're really asking is what can be done. And so in amongst all of these discussions, there's this grappling with this notion of agency, responsibility. And these are deep and philosophical questions, and they're perennial questions. What is the relationship between, what I'd like to do and what can I do? So in this particular seminar series, I think what's important to address is the question of, there are sort of four sections to this. First of all, I would like to open the floor to discuss what kind of change is it that people want to see? because it's one thing to talk about agency and constraint, but there's a slight arrogance there if we start to assume that we all want the same kind of change. So the first question is, what kind of change is it that you think we need to see in the world? And these are our subjective expressions here I'm asking for. And then as a bit of a free flow from that, what do you see to be areas of where is your agency in this regard, and do you see any constraint as well? In other words, in your own experience, in your own realm that you're interested in, whether it be social issues, environmental issues, the overlap between them, what is it that constrains agency, and is there agency? So in relation to those two questions, I think I'm very interested in, when it comes to my turn to speak, to talk about the notion of what now. Once we sort of start to find or feel our way through what it means to be able to act, and what kind of change we think we should see in the world, and what it is that we think we value. Once we sort of have those kind of those ideas out in the open, then the question for me is always, now what? Here and now, as Deleuze and Guattari say, the people yet to come. What can we do with this? So I'm very interested to hear what you all have to say, because as Andrea said there in the introduction, in my own personal work, in my doctorate, it's all about this notion of responsibility. Instead of responsibility, it's a play on if you can't be entirely responsible for the world, of course we can't, then where does your responsibility lie? Where does my responsibility lie? So I guess there's a whole bunch going on here. So to simplify it and to turn this into a round table instead of me blabbering on, I'd like to open the floor with posing the question: what kind of change do you think we need to see? And what do you see as the constraining factors and the agentic factors that exist in that realm? Do you think, or do you experience change or transformation in any sense in your life, or is it completely constrained by various factors? So I think there's lots we can chew on in amongst it all, but I'm going to stop there. Maybe we could all, there's not very many of us, maybe we could all put our cameras on, yeah, if you like, and open it up to a discussion, beginning with what kind of change is it that you think you want to see in the world? Because I'm not sure that we all absolutely agree on that. We might think we do, but I really don't know if we do. So yeah, we can take it from there and see how it goes. All right. Does anybody want to respond to this idea of anything along the theme of what can we do? What should we do in regards to these pertinent issues that we talk about? Yay, we've got a hand. Our saviour. Okay, Gary.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm anything close to savior, but so I mean, I think so. I work in climate and climate resilience, and we're doing a plan for the city at the moment, and we have a whole bunch of actions coming out of that. You know, so I could run through the detail of that, but I think for me the key thing is to come back to the thinking, is that the way we relate to the world has got us where we are at the moment, and the change that we need is the way we relate to the world, in the sense that we see, for instance, nature is ours to use as we wish or as we have power to. We see technology as our saving grace, as our savior. You know, so I think that those are the things that lead to the problems that we sit with at the moment. You know, and for me, that's where the change needs to happen, is how we think about the world, or how we relate to it, rather.
Yeah.
Can I jump in there too? I don't have a hand-raising function as host for some reason. They don't allow me to hand, so I just have to jump in by voice.
It's a small group. We can handle it. Yeah.
Yeah. So along with that, I agree with Gary completely. We need a change in the way that we relate to the world, and also similar change in the way that we relate to one another. So instead of treating one another as competitions for our place in the world, that my being in the world somehow takes away from your being in the world. So if the more I have, the less you do, that kind of thing. I think if we, I mean, I'm assuming we're doing blue sky, pie in the sky, you know, but that's something I would very much like to see, is a far, far less competitive attitude towards other humans. That, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. And non-humans. Feline non-humans. Hello, Ernst. Welcome.
Yes, hi, thanks. No, just maybe two thoughts from my side is obviously what is, I think we can speak reasonably comfortable and think about these deep things, because what do we call it, that Maslow's theory of needs is sort of covered. You know, we basically have oxygen so we can breathe, we have hopefully a meal by the end of the day, and I think that is maybe a challenge if we want to project this to the entire world, because there's quite a big portion of our population, not just in South Africa, I think if we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, that haven't got those needs met, the basics. And that is maybe something, you know, do you put that down as a percentage? You know, if it's that's always difficult. So we can think of, okay, our needs are met. We can think comfortably about how should we maybe distribute some of the, call it the wealth. And I just, funny enough, listened to a talk quite recently by a group in Germany that pretty much where I did my sabbatical a few years ago. And he also talks about that, where do you draw the line to actually distribute the wealth that everybody is sort of equal? And that puts us in a challenge where, you know, we might be pushing into sort of the Marxist idea, who decides on who has equal rights to their sandbox. You know, you only get one hand of sand, the next person gets two hands. Who decides on those things? And that is where I think a challenge is, you know, how do we then decide if the basic needs are met? Who decides that? And that is maybe it's a very difficult question to answer. We can obviously look at the human rights agenda, the UN, you know, charter, and all of those things. And then the other one is, and how much is enough? You know, your needs are met to a certain level. The guy in Hollywood, or let's use, you know, areas where there's extreme wealth, you know, their needs are not met if they don't have the next Lamborghini. You know, so we might feel that our needs are met. Other areas of other people in other world, it becomes a relative term. So yes, it's a tough question, but maybe just two thoughts on basic needs. And the person who hasn't covered his basic needs is not even going to think about climate change. He just wants to survive until tomorrow, or by next week. And then obviously my needs are bigger than your needs. Unfortunately, that's a difficult one. Who's going to decide on that one? Just some thoughts on that.
Yeah. Some pertinent things coming through here. I'll keep an eye on. You can just jump in. I think we're a small enough group. We don't need to put hands up, I don't think. But you know, I'm hearing this notion of we need to change how we relate to one another. and how we relate to the world. And that's a perspective that comes through the various ecological thinkers and schools now. You know, you've got social ecology, political ecology, ecological economics. You've got all of these ecofeminisms, all these ideas coming together that all talk about or want to challenge how we relate to the world, and suggest that that includes how we relate to one another. But then, Ernst, you mentioned these macro factors, these basic needs, you know, and this is so important because we go from sort of the world of ideas to the real world when you start thinking about the fact that most of the, you know, South Africa's population don't have access to basic amenities. 11 million people are living in informal settlements. So on whose head is it, you know, whose shoulders is it to bring about this change of thinking? And so we're kind of entering into this murky realm of responsibility that feels like it's entirely ours, but at the same time it feels like we're entirely responsible, but we have no accountability or responsibility to the greater scheme of things at the same time. Not accountability, but no impact. So it's like this horrible sort of potentially this horrible, I think, conundrum can arise with a huge sense of personal responsibility that comes from an individualist society that says that we're all autonomous and we have meritocracy and everything. So we have all of this freedom and therefore we have responsibility. At the same time, we have these macro systems that lead to literally billions of people not having enough to eat, while we have diseases of affluence killing more people than anything else in the West. So you've got this like a rub, and that's why this question I think is so important, because I think is Janet here? I don't know if Janet's here, but Janet's been very good. No, she's not. Janet's been very good at drawing attention to the sort of effects, if you like, produced by the economic system. And Ernst, you mentioned they're going into sort of the Marxist idea, because we start talking about redistribution of wealth and how that happens, and again, who's responsible for that. I would say if there's an understanding of the problems, then we can start to resolve them perhaps in our own individual personal spaces to some extent. Andrea, you mentioned competition. I think that is absolutely a crucial element in relation to social identity and how we relate to one another, because the economic system with its the debt-based pressures that are imposed upon all nations, you know, relate to an economic system that is driven by either real or presumed or contrived scarcity, and that creates competition and stress-based competition from the off. You know, children are taught very young at school that competition is the way of the world, and you know, I don't see how we can achieve great peace in the world if we have an economic system that is built upon scarcity and competition. So I think these macro elements are really important to take consideration of. But I have to ask this question, and you're all going to groan at me, but what is a system? What is the economic system? Because the feeling I get is that I'm always assuming it's out there and it's imposing on me, and that takes away my agency. But if the economic system is built upon organizations of relations, then maybe there is some agency. I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but in many places in the world, there's a development of alternative currencies where people begin exchanging in a way where they base their currency on a different exchange, different value exchange. So things are not linked or hitched to an economic system that abstracts entirely from what things are actually worth. You know, food should be really quite expensive, for example, and you know, instead it's very cheap. You know, so it's about really revaluing or questioning what it is that we value. And I don't know, but I think there is agency in that. If any system is ever to change, it doesn't change in its totality. It co-evolves. So there are both individual actors and there are emergent entities or organizations beyond those entities, beyond us as individuals interacting with each other. But there is agency in the way that we choose to respond to one another to a certain degree, is there not? Perhaps this whole seminar series and the way that we're discussing things now is in some small way a move away from a particular way of thinking. We're discussing different alternatives now. Are we becoming a new system now, just in doing what we're doing, talking? I guess my question is, bouncing back, where does the system live? Because I think it's very dangerous if I'm bad at assuming that there are these macro forces that are completely insurmountable. But yet changes do happen. Big shifts happen, and they happen through a million small actions rather than huge,
big,
you know.
disaster. Like a comet hitting us.
Well, yes,
change when we're
that's a very
actually
good point, Andrea. I'm going to stop talking a bit, but are we stuck in a system? Does a system define us? You know, and I suppose I've made this restricted this to the economic system, but you could open this out to other systems of ideas beyond the economic system. So if we say do the systems of ideas, does our collectivism define us? Is there no room for escape? I wonder what anyone thinks about that.
If I can maybe ask you a question, I like your idea. And let's look at historically, if we think back about slavery, you know, it's not that many years ago that it was actually quite common to have slavery and to have your slave. And there's still places in the world that have sort of a slave trade and things like that. But for us in general, we have, for any better word, evolved to a place where we just the thought of having a slave and child labor and children being sold into slavery, you know, we have changed somehow in that, and that didn't happen overnight. And I think somehow we did eventually grow to a resistance towards the idea of actually owning people. And how did that actually happen? You know, what were the small little seeds? And I think you're sort of hinting at that. There were those little seeds that happened across the world where people said no, you know, and sort of resisted that. And maybe that is what you're talking about, that there's these pockets of call it resistance, not civil war, but pockets of thinking happening where we say, okay, you know, maybe we should not, in the case of slave labor, not own slaves. There are people with rights, and maybe now we're also saying maybe we should think about the environment differently. You know, when we actually do travel by an aeroplane, which we could have actually rather Skyped to attend that meeting and things like that. So maybe that's sort of where we are heading, and maybe use that as a historical benchmark. And yeah, it's positive. So there is change moving in the right direction, I hope.
But I think, Emma,
No.
both you and Gary and Andrea, there's sort of this notion that what we're supposed to be doing here is critiquing our own thinking, and we keep saying we really ought to do that. Are we doing that? I don't know that we are. And I think just what you're talking about systems is a way that we stop ourselves. I've been sort of immersed in various things. One is a paper by a fellow who was running what was called a flying university in a prison in Alaska, where most of the incarcerated people are indigenous, and going in and doing philosophy, taking the university philosophy class into the prison and treating the incarcerated students as organic intellectuals. And he developed what he called, or I don't know, one of the facets of the work they did was called, oh, I can't remember what, but it isn't a notion of like, we're going to imagine. We also really need to question this we business, because sometimes we're talking about we academics and designated thinkers and And that's really suspect because, well, we know it is. Anyways, I haven't digested any of this. One thing you were just speaking about evolution, like how does change happen? How does the change we want? How do we not stop doing this? And I remember being at a workshop on the archives of the non-racial that was all these international, lots of grad students and all kinds of fabulous people, including Angela Davis and Ashiel Mbembe. Let me just, say that. And the thing was opened up by, yeah, why not? Give myself some gravity. It was opened by Ahmed Kathrada. And the first thing this crowd of academics did was ask, well, how do you define non-racialism? And he just sat back and said, I am not going to argue definitions with academics. These things evolve. So one of the things the Flying University was talking about, and Havel, Václav Havel I'm reading, is you don't start with what's the thing I want and how's the thing I'm going to get there, because that means we keep playing God, we keep playing like we're in charge of these things. Evolution doesn't work like that. Change doesn't work like that. Change often works in the spaces between that we can't see if we're busy conceptualizing and defining and systematizing. And let me just find this really quick quote. Havel writes, any intention can become its exact opposite if it is carried forward in the conventionalized pseudo-ideological thinking that has become so dangerously domesticated in all areas of our social lives. So yeah, that's just a little bit, and let me stop there.
Thanks, Helen. Gary, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. To come to your point about critique and thinking, one of the things I've been thinking about in terms of the Don't Look Up, the assumption of the movie is that we've made a wrong turn at some point, and there's a lot of the thinking around about what should change assumes that we did something wrong. But if you look at the humanity as a species, we're 8 billion on the planet at the moment. We're a highly successful species in that sense, so from a species perspective, we've done very well as a whereas when things were better in the sense of we think we went off tangent, we were only a million or 2 million people on the planet at that point, so I'm not sure that we are geared to survival as much as we are geared to thriving in place. Survival, it becomes a priority when the conditions are extreme, but generally conditions are not extreme. When the sun comes up, we don't. So the question in my mind is that are we trying to change something for the better or different in terms of where do we want to see the change? So to Emma's original question is what the change that we want to see, what exactly is that, and the 8 billion people on the planet work on a system that is competitive, that doesn't allocate resources equitably, that rewards things that are not necessarily the things that we want to reward, but yet we are 8 billion. Is that not, maybe that's a controversial point, is that maybe not the right, was that not the right course to go? Yeah, so.
Anybody want to jump in here with Gary's point so that I don't hog? Otherwise, I am going to jump in. Anyone else? Oh, Gary. Oh, yes, please. Please. Hello, Alex.
Sorry, I struggle not to fall into the position of just listening because there's so many thoughts I want to respond to and chew on. And so many new things are being introduced. So I'm going to try and respond to the last two responses, Helen's and Gary's at the same time. So on systems thinking and sort of academic stuff related to that, I worked with the late Professor Ben Turok for a few years as an intern and a researcher at his little Social and Economic Policy Institute, which Helen also worked at. And the thing that I learned from Ben, this was while I was also as a student. So I was learning how to think and what to think. And one of the tensions that I had with him, and because he was much older and a bit dogmatic, it was difficult to argue the point with him, that he thought very much like an engineer. So for him, the system was a language that he used all the time. And it was helpful, but the blind spot of it was that it had very little room to discuss matters of the heart, which are the kinds of things, what do we value, how do we value something? And for him, it was just, at least while we were doing research, not that important. But what I also found odd about him as a person is that it seemed like he had a very difficult time to really encourage and get to know the people who worked with him. And so he had an incredible mind. He was a very principled person, very hardworking, inspirational in that sense. But for some reason, he couldn't light up the fire. And, there are many reasons, possible explanations, but the matters of the heart then started becoming important to me because, in our discussions of slavery and that changing and the divine right and identity of kings and queens changing, what I find in my work and in my life, just in the course of my life, in my own lifetime, what I find very odd and what I find quite paralyzing is that the forms of distress that are very likely a response to the kind of societies in which we live have become medical phenomena. So rather than powerlessness, we speak about depression, or rather than despair and fear, we speak about anxiety. And yeah, I wonder what would happen, what would our political discourse look like if that lens changed. And then the institutions responsible for treating depression and anxiety changed. And if the ways in which people responded to feelings of depression and anxiety were to form communities of solidarity, stuff like that, still thinking about it, but yeah, I wonder what that would look like.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Sure.
And you have a lot of experience in the realm of, I suppose, dealing with the other side of that, so you know what alternatives exist, hey? Yeah, I always come back to the pressures of the system because it contorts and pressures all of our relationships into a throughput, bigger, more, faster is better mindset. And I think that conditions how you look at yourself and your inner world, your inner ecology, and how you look at other people. But at the same time, it's so deterministic, and I know that so there's this term they use in ecological economics that's really useful. It's called economism, and it's like the idea that the way we think about our relationship with wider nature and how we organize ourselves economically shapes all aspects of our lives, because it folds through all the social institutions, and we're social beings, and for 8 years of our life we are continuously conditioned into whatever structure you find yourself in society. So I think we need to have a bit of radical empathy for one another. We're all babies born into a system, and I can't hate anyone, including the most grotesque so-called human beings, if we have grotesque systems. And the reason I say it's grotesque is because we have an amoral economic system that has globalized to such an extent that we don't have ethics built in. We have a business ethic. So I do talk about systems a lot and think about changing systems, but that's not where my agency lies. And Alex, you said, in fact, I feel powerless in that regard, and it drains me to write about that stuff. I'm writing about it now for my papers, and I feel exhausted by it. What I feel really lifted up by is when I get to the end bit and I say, but despite all of this constraint, despite these systems, then what, now what, and what's important. And, these matters of the heart you're talking about, maybe activism isn't out there. Maybe activism is in constantly trying to move from a place that is, central to our common humanity, and that has ensured our survival for not just the last explosion of population over the last few hundred years, but for the entirety of our species. It's been cooperation, it's been empathy and compassion. These are the traits that I think are so subjugated now, and maybe just bringing those into everyday conversation, including inner dialogue, and maybe just thinking about things relationally as opposed to our atomistic way of understanding ourselves, which I think is really, really in there with me, at least. I used to only care about this plot. I only cared about planting trees on this plot. I never used to go and plant trees anywhere else. Why was that? It was because it was like mine and my little piece of agency, my little place. But it's everyone's land, it's everyone's trees. It shouldn't matter where I plant the trees. You see what I'm saying? So maybe part of the agency that exists in this world is in how we choose to respond to the world despite its issues. And so your idea about heart there, Andrea?
If there's a change that you want or a group of people want, and it's not happening, it basically means that nobody else wants it, because change will happen when everybody wants that change. So in a way, if you are in sort of desiring environmental change, like Gary, a different relationship to our world.
I mean,
if you want non-competition, like all of us, if you want a non-competitive way of being with people, it's never going to happen until everybody else wants it. And then you kind of get into this thing of, okay, well then how do you get everybody else to want what I want? Maybe you just have to accept that people don't want to change in the way that you or I feel would be better for humanity. I don't know, I'm kind of like responding a little bit to Gary saying we're a successful species. We've become successful by doing these kinds of things. Maybe we've also become detrimental and dangerous. Maybe that's what we're saying. But nevertheless, I mean, change is not going to happen until everybody wants it. So it's not going to happen. So why are we sitting here chattering away about what we're dreaming of? But it's actually nobody else's dream. I don't know, Gary.
No, I mean, I think for me you have to be careful about the arrogance of the assumption that your way of seeing the world is the right way of seeing the world. That there's and that's the. I think we have to, the difficulty we lie with is that we have 8 billion people who see the world slightly differently. It's a slight different view. And the way that we've solved that complexity is through things like power and conflict and types and things like that. So I become the ruler, and then you have a choice. You can opt in or opt out. And if you opt out, you go live somewhere else. If you opt in, then you abide by the rules. And that's how we've run our systems on using power to settle the conflicts. And I don't think that we know yet how to incorporate 8 billion views on the planet. And so it's almost a logistical issue more than a you know, I mean, if you look at social media and what's happened in social media, if you take Twitter, for example, I mean, I left contributing to Twitter when Musk took over, and I go back occasionally for news and that kind of stuff. But I've been watching it very closely in terms of the lead up to the American election, and the sewage that's running through that system at the moment is terrible. I mean, it's just how people relate to each other and talk to each other, and you can't imagine that that's normal, you know. So the you know, and that's a system that has allowed us to speak to each other. So we, you know, through Twitter we've been able to communicate with each other, and what it's gravitated to a place of people are not very nice to each other on that, you know. So yeah, maybe as a species we just have to run our course, and then the Earth will reset itself, and then start up with another species. But that's not a very satisfying answer, you know. I mean, I would like to have thought that my time on Earth was worth a little bit more than just, you know, extending the species till its end. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Don't know if anybody else. I don't want to. Yeah. Oh, yay. Hey, Inga. I was hoping we'd hear from you.
Hi, Emma. Sorry about the no camera. I had to join on 3 different phones. For some reason, my Zoom just does not want to work today.
Sorry, man.
Your ideas are fantastic. And actually, after I sent Andrea my seminar title for next week, I was amazed and humbled by the fact that your topic is the same or very similar, about how do we act instead of just thinking. I mean, you know, I've spent my whole life up to now just thinking and writing stuff, and what now? So I've also had that what now kind of experience. And again, I'm going to refer to theory, but there's this theorist, Hamid Hosseini, is a social movement theorist. And he was recently I think it was last year or the year before, at a conference. And he was discussing this new idea he's suggesting called commonism, as opposed to communism, but commonism. I could send you, I could share the link to his talk. I think it was actually published as a book chapter eventually. But he was really lambasting academics in that presentation about, yes, we come to the sustainability conference and we talk to each other as intellectuals, and we're going to write fantastic articles as a result of these things. And that's where things end. And he spoke previously about a model of transversality, which he was emphasizing the idea of, you know, academics working with activists and different interest groups working with each other despite some minor differences they might have ideologically. And he said what this communism is basically the model he's suggesting, which supplants the idea of transversality, where the most practical way to effect change, even though it's not totalitarian in its orientation, as in the totality of humanity will now subscribe to an ecologically benign approach. Communism is about seeking out interest groups, be it a political movement, be it an NGO or a group of people, a collective, who have the same perspectives on what needs to change, and who then work together and try to grow their coalition of resistance as much as possible in order to effect change, even if it's just in a suburb of a city. But he felt that, you know, we actually have so much in common with people. Should we only look around us and see who's out there? And that is exactly how I've experienced the last couple of years, where just by coincidence, for example, an NGO contacted me saying, hey, we used one of your papers in our report. Won't you look at our report? And then when I looked at that, I was like absolutely blown away. And I'm still working with this NGO. Yes, they're based in Uganda, not in South Africa, so I haven't been there. But we constantly working together. And I feel so much more worthy of being alive just by the mere fact of not just theorizing on my own for other clever people. And I know other people have a lot more experience in this, for example, Gary and yourself, but being very new at this idea of being more of a political animal or more of an activist in orientation, it's really fantastic, and I feel less hopeless. But it's actually not hard to find people who have this common set of ideals, and who actually then, you know, they're differently positioned. So we positioned at unis, you know, I have to go to varsity, I don't know, 20-something hours a week in order to be able to meet my conditions of service. They're differently situated. So they're in the field, they're in the forests of the Congo. They're doing things I can't do, but I can do my little bit towards them, and they enrich me and enrich my understanding of what resistance looks like. So I just thought you might find this idea of communism by Hosseini very intriguing. But thank you for this.
Oh, thanks so much, Inge. It's so lovely to hear from you. I like that. I know the notion of transversality through Guattari, Felix. And it's the same in his ecologics. It's the same kind of idea. He says we need to make new. It's not about imagining a big idea, but it's about forging these networks, zillions of them.
Okay.
And, you know, I also find, you know, when you read ecological thinkers or relational thinkers that propose or offer an alternative way, and often mainly drawing on in ancient indigenous knowledge, and now complexity science is coming full circle back into that realm, if you like. But, you know, a lot of people that talk in these ecological circles and ways and develop a particular perspective have a strong care ethic. And a strong care ethic pushes a strong sense of responsibility and a desire to act. And that's why I think compassion and empathy are so important to be extended out, you know, beyond the non-human as well, to wider nature, because that's where the ethic of care or the value come from, you know. But what my point is, related to yours, is that a lot of people find that they leave academic spaces because they want to do things. But the academic space is so central at the same time to all of these changing systems of ideas. Like what you're doing, Inge, is effectual. But the problem is if we try and translate that into, well, it doesn't change the macro. If we constantly relate everything we do to the greater scheme, then it gets lost in the ocean of life. But it's important what you're doing. It's important that you're supporting and that you're being nourished, and it's a two-way relationship. And I think it's also extremely important to do what you're saying. I'm going to listen to you on this one. And that's to find your tribe and make these connections and put your energy there. I'm finding that writing about large-scale systemic problems is a responsibility that I can't really bear for much longer. I can't do it. It's too weighty. It doesn't bring me any joy. It makes me angry and resentful. But when I write about or actually go and do garden related things and community garden related things, resistance feels fertile. It's there. I was recently, just the other weekend, at this big seed swap and plant swap, and there was no money. Well, okay, no, I lie. There was a little bit of money changed hands because some people didn't have anything to swap, and we didn't want them to feel excluded. But people swapped plants and seeds and knowledge and books and ideas and worm tea and shared and fed each other's spirits and nourished one another, all coming from an ethic of, I care, I want to do my little piece. And if you look at those interactions and how many billions of them must be going on right now? How many billions of interactions are happening right now that maintain a care ethic and a genuine concern for others and for what's going on in our planet? I mean, I think it's unfathomable. Like we don't know. And maybe that it's a matter of I don't know what I'm saying. I'm rambling, guys. I'm just thinking aloud, but maybe it's a matter of where we place our focus, like where what we pay attention to. Gary, if you're constantly looking at the bigger scale, you'll probably get depleted too. Like you have to work at what you can work at, which is in the metro, you know, your world. So Inga, thanks. I'll let other people talk. I'm taking too much liberties, but resistance is fertile.
So,
Thinking.
Emma, my response then is, okay, that sounds pretty. It sounds sweet. It sounds all nice and you know, half warm and fluffy, yada, yada, yada. And nevertheless, our stats are just, say, on carbon, as Gary showed us. I mean, our carbon use has just increased, or our emissions are even higher than they ever were. Since how many of those COP, Gary, help me with the stats here. How many of them?
29.
29 or something? And in that time, we have just created an even more serious situation. We haven't done anything. So the small little things that everybody does to make themselves feel okay, so what? That would be
Anyone
the
else?
question I would ask. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. Does anyone else want to respond?
Yeah,
So what to the little things? Yeah.
if I can, so Inga, to your point, I mean, I've been an activist for most of my life, and a thinker, and I've always tried to balance the two. So I think the one lesson I've asked you up front was there's practice and there's theory, and the two have to inform each other. And I've tried to live to that, you know. So to what Emma's saying is that you have to do things at a level that you can control things, where you can actually see change for you as an individual in terms of working, but ultimately it is at not a theoretical level, but is how we see the world is where this thing lies, you know. So I don't think the solution is going back to indigenous views, even though they're highly attractive, because indigenous views have only been able to sustain communities of 150, 200, 300 people maybe, but they haven't been able to sustain 8 billion people. And that the scale of that is the issue that we face, is that we have actually run out of limits. We have run into the limit of the planet in terms of the boundary of the planet, that we can't regenerate beyond a certain point. I mean, we are, you know, so it's the whole Malthus, I hope I pronounce it correctly, but the whole Malthus dilemma is that he had said, look, we're going to run out of food and then we never did, you know. And so people say, okay, well, you got it wrong. Technology saved us. But in principle, his theory is not wrong, is that we live on a finite planet, but it is both finite and regenerative. And that balance we haven't really understood, you know. So so to come back to your point, is I think that the point is about seeing the world as a commons, and the guys like Mark Swilling and others that work on sustainability are starting to talk about a commons approach to the planet, that we share the planet, you know. So the air is shared, the plastic we distribute is shared, etc. And I think that so you work at that in your own little corner, you work at that, and eventually. So I disagree with Andrea in the sense that everyone has to be on board. I think that there's a place of sufficiency that you have to have sufficient numbers on board to create momentum, and often that's not 95%, often that's 30%, so so you have to create that momentum. But I think I think the last thought, we went to this philosophy seminar at ISCIA, and one of the guest speakers was an American person who spoke about the left and the right, and how the right had daddy issues, was the term that he'd used. And what struck me about that view was the unassailability of seeing the person seeing himself as left, and that was the morally correct position to be in. That he then used that as a platform from which he could then what's the right word, is demean the persons who didn't agree with him in terms of saying that they had daddy issues and that kind of stuff, rather than and so seeing that person as human, and that's the difficulty for me, is that I'm not sure how we get to that point where we're able to see each other in equal terms, and whether that is the right way to do things. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm now too rambling.
It's a rambly session. I think it's allowed. How do you feel, Andrea? Any more hopeful?
Hell no. Yeah. No, I'm
I would
teasing.
just like to draw attention to the fact that we've only got 5 minutes. Helen.
Yes, I would like to jump in. Yeah, I like where Gary was ending there. And it reminded me of this thing from Havel. And okay, so first of all, Emma, you said that getting lost in the sea of life, like it was a bad thing. And I think you should reconsider that, little aside. But also the notion of let's always include the interhuman and the other than human and all of our other kin, but we're not taking what it is to be human seriously enough. And if you look at the people I'm reading from Eastern Europe, the Havels and Patočka and those folks, they say that restoring our humanity and our subjectivity and understanding that for what it actually is, and it's happening all the time. So it's not like there's 8 billion not doing anything, whatever. It's not that it isn't already happening, but we are trained in some way in our thinking and in our observing that we are looking at things rather than experiencing things. And if we're looking at things, we're not in contact with reality, because experience is contact. So what Havel says here, and he also says capitalism and socialism, it seems to me that these thoroughly ideological and often semantically confused categories have long since been beside the point. The question is wholly other, deeper, and equally relevant to all, which means we're all on the same side, in the same boat. Whether we shall, by whatever means, succeed in reconstituting the natural world as the true terrain of politics, rehabilitating the personal experience of human beings as the initial measure of things, placing morality above politics and responsibility above our desires, in making human community meaningful, in returning content to human speech, in reconstituting as the focus of all social action the autonomous, integral, and dignified human I, responsible for ourselves because we are bound to something higher and capable of sacrificing something, in extreme cases, even everything, of this banal, prosperous, private life, that rule of everydayness, as Jan Patočka used to say, for the sake of that which gives life meaning. That would go a long ways to bringing us into something that's more lively, more meaningful, more human, more sacred, more connected, more relational, more experiential. and there's something, it just keeps coming to me that it does comes down to politics, because it does come down to power. And I don't think it's about sharing the wealth. Maybe it's about sharing the lack and sharing the poverty and sharing the distress and sharing the world ending. And there I just took myself off piste a little bit. So I'll just stop. I hate when I do that. But anyways, that's what I'm talking about.
Thank you,
And it's already
Helen.
happening. And it's not like pie in the sky. It's just like we don't trust it and we don't keep faith in it in our own experience.
Yeah. Gary, are you going to see us out? Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, I don't know about seeing us out, but I just wanted to, with all the research work I've been doing, so I've gone through all the extinction events that the Earth has gone through, you know, and the argument is that we're currently in a 6th extinction event, and that we have 1 million species due to expire through human action in sort of 2030, 2050. But one of the extinction events, I don't know if you know, was created by plants. Is that plants grew so rapidly that they altered the atmosphere of the Earth, which gave us oxygen. And we are here because plants did that. You know, and I'm not sure what that does to my perception, but maybe humans kind of have to run their course because there's something else coming afterwards.
Yeah, the plastic eating monsters.
The plastic, we already have bacteria that are starting to eat plastic, you know, so the, yeah, so it was, I have no confident outcome to that thought, but I was struck by that fact that plants actually, there were the species before us that altered this Earth significantly, and we wouldn't be here if plants hadn't done that.
Yeah, great. And the plastic monsters will be eating us because we are so full of microplastics. So yes, we will be the fodder for a whole new, a brave new world of plastic monsters. It just won't be us. That's fine.
Well, I think possibly on the note of plastic monsters, we might have to end our philosophical seminar. Yeah, deep gratitude, everyone, for sharing perspective on tricky questions, gritty questions that I think we all go, and I don't know about you all, but I chew on this stuff for a number of days afterwards. So thank you for enlightening me, all of you. Inge, thanks for making me feel a little bit more hopeful. Helen, thanks for keeping me on target. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they'd like to say, because if not, then I'll say goodbye, and I'll very much look forward to hearing from Inge next week, I believe, in our penultimate seminar series. Hey, Andrea?
Not quite penultimate. There are 2 after Inge. Yeah.
Oh, is there 2 more? Okay, so another 3. Another 3
Yes.
for the series.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Em.
Well,
yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely afternoon, evening.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.